They say you can't rebuild a life from ashes, that once you lose everything, it's gone forever. But what if one act, one impossible act, could rewrite the ending? On a dusty Lagos roadside, a billionaire single mother steps out of her Bentley, and kneels before a homeless man. For words, "Will you marry me?" What followed wasn't just a love story. It was a second chance that would change not only 2 lives, but thousands. This is their journey, from heartbreak to hope, from the streets to a global stage. This is where belief begins. The mid-afternoon sun hung low over Lagos, its golden light casting long shadows over the cracked pavement outside the Super Save supermarket. The heat rippled in the air, making the scene almost shimmer. Street vendors fanned themselves lazily, their stalls lined with everything from roasted corn to brightly colored fabrics. The crowd was restless, weary from the day's hustle, until a quiet hum turned every head. A sleek Bentley, polished to a mirror's shine, glided through the dust like it didn't belong there. Whispers moved through the crowd like wildfire. Heads tilted. Eyes squinted. Someone muttered, "Who's that? A minister's wife? A movie star?" The car stopped, its doors reflecting the chaos of the street in distorted shapes. And then, she stepped out. Monica Williams. Even if you had never met her, you would know the name. It was in the magazines, on the billboards, whispered in boardrooms. Africa's software queen. CEO of M-Tech, a billion-dollar tech empire. The woman whose face had graced the cover of Forbes Africa twice in a single year. And there she was, standing on a dusty roadside, her cream-colored jumpsuit catching the light, her heels clicking against the concrete like the beat of a drum. The crowd leaned forward, expecting her to head inside for something expensive, imported wine, gourmet chocolate, maybe an international interview. Instead, Monica's gaze swept past the murmuring onlookers, past the rows of shop signs, and landed on someone sitting against the wall. He was almost invisible at first. Just another shadow among the crates and torn cardboard. But she saw him. Jacob Uch. His coat was brown once, now faded and frayed, the collar curling like burnt paper. A green shirt peeked out beneath, but it was stiff from grime. His hair was a wild, matted mess, his beard, tangled and untrimmed, made him look far older than he was. His skin carried the dust of too many nights sleeping under the open sky. A battered black bag rested against his side, stuffed so full it seemed to hold the remnants of another life. His hands were clasped in his lap, knuckles scarred and raw. He didn't look up until her shadow fell over him. Jacob's first thought was that he was in trouble. People didn't stop for him, certainly not people like her. Monica smiled. It wasn't a polite, distant smile, but a warm one. The kind of smile that dared to cross boundaries. "My name is Monica," she said softly, like she didn't want to scare him. He blinked at her, slow and cautious. "Jacob." Jacob Uch. A ripple went through the crowd, as if the air itself had grown heavy. And then Monica did something so unthinkable that even the street vendors stopped bargaining mid-sentence. "I've seen you here," she continued. "I've heard you talk, about data, about business. Like someone who's lived in that world. I don't know your story, but I believe you just need a second chance." Her next words came with a deep, visible breath. "So I'm asking you something crazy." Jacob's brow furrowed. "Will you marry me?" It was as if the world froze. The hum of the Bentley engine faded, the rustle of the crowd stilled, even the vendors' frying pans seemed to stop sizzling. Somewhere, a baby began to cry, only to be hushed by its stunned mother. Jacob stared at her, as if trying to decide whether she was joking, hallucinating, or testing him. And then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "If you really mean that," he said, voice low and measured, "go inside that supermarket, buy a ring, come back, kneel down, and ask me like you mean it." Gasps shot through the crowd like sparks. "Is he mad?" someone whispered. Rejecting a billionaire? Another man shook his head in disbelief. But Monica didn't flinch. She turned on her heel, heels clicking like a countdown, and disappeared into the supermarket. 5 minutes later, she returned. In her hand, a diamond ring that could buy the entire block. Without hesitation, Monica bent one knee right there on the dusty concrete, the crowd parting around her like she was something both sacred and dangerous. "Jacob Uch," she said, her voice trembling but strong, "will you marry me?" He froze. People lifted their phones, recording the impossible. Cars slowed down, horns honking faintly in the distance. A woman clutched her head, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Jacob's eyes swept over her, the elegant woman who could have chosen anyone, anywhere, and something in him cracked. Maybe it was the kindness in her eyes, maybe the sheer audacity of the moment, or maybe the way she didn't care who was watching. "Yes," he whispered. A cheer erupted, half in disbelief, half in celebration. She slid the ring onto his finger, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt the weight of something valuable resting in his hands. "Now get in the car," she said with a smile. He hesitated, glancing at his clothes, his mud-caked shoes. "I'll stain your seat." "I don't care." When he finally rose, it was like watching a man crawl out of his own grave. He stepped into the Bentley, the door closing with a solid, final click. The life he knew was gone. What lay ahead, he couldn't even imagine. But Jacob had no idea. This was only the beginning. The Bentley hummed like a secret as it cut through the busy Lego streets, the chaos of honking danfos and shouting hawkers muted behind its soundproofed glass. Outside, Victoria Island's skyline glittered like a necklace of diamonds against the afternoon sun. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and something floral, elegant but not overpowering. Jacob sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his battered black bag balanced on his lap like it was the only anchor he had left. His eyes darted between the road ahead and the woman driving beside him. He didn't know whether to feel nervous, grateful, or suspicious. Everything about this felt unreal, like a dream too fragile to believe. That morning, he'd been invisible. A shadow on the sidewalk. A man people stepped around. Now, he was sitting inside a car worth more than he'd seen in his lifetime, wearing a diamond ring that caught the light every time he moved his hand. Monica glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His shoulders were hunched, his face guarded. She could tell this wasn't the time for questions. He needed space, room to breathe, to feel human again. "We're making a quick stop," she said finally, her tone light. Jacob nodded without asking where. They pulled up to a building with bold gold lettering that read, Kingsman Barber's Spa. The glass doors gleamed, reflecting the luxury cars parked outside. A doorman in a crisp white shirt stepped forward to open the door, but his polite smile faltered when he saw Jacob. His gaze flicked from Jacob's worn clothes to Monica's immaculate appearance, confusion flickering in his eyes. "He's with me," Monica said simply, her voice carrying enough weight to silence any doubt. Inside, everything sparkled, marble floors polished to perfection, gold-rimmed mirrors reflecting warm light, the faint scent of expensive cologne drifting through the air. The staff straightened at the sight of her, murmuring greetings. But their eyes inevitably slid back to Jacob, lingering just a second too long. Monica stepped closer to him. "Let them clean you up," she said gently. "I'll wait here." Jacob hesitated, gripping his bag tighter. Part of him wanted to run, to escape before the weight of all this became too much. But something in her expression, calm, steady, unjudging, kept him rooted. He followed one of the attendants to a leather chair. The barber didn't speak much, just draped a crisp white cape over him and began working. Snip. Snip. Years of tangled beard fell in clumps to the floor. The sound of scissors was hypnotic, like someone cutting away the past. The warm lather and careful strokes of the razor revealed skin he hadn't seen in years. His hair, once a wild and matted forest, was trimmed, shaped, and styled into something sharp, deliberate. The grime that had clung to him like a second skin was scrubbed away in the sink until his reflection in the mirror began to change. When they handed him a fresh towel, he barely recognized the man staring back. His jawline was strong, his cheekbones pronounced. His eyes, dark, intelligent, but tired, seemed sharper now, alive in a way they hadn't been in years. "Sir, your clothes," one of the stylists said, presenting a neatly pressed white shirt, tailored black trousers, and polished leather loafers. Jacob ran his fingers over the fabric. It had been so long since he'd touched anything new, anything clean. He stepped into the changing room, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly above him, and for a moment, he just stood there holding the shirt, breathing in its crisp scent. When he stepped back out, the room went silent for a beat. Monica, who had been seated with a magazine in her hands, looked up, and gasped. In place of the scruffy, weathered man from the sidewalk stood someone else entirely. Jacob looked powerful. He looked like a man who belonged in corner offices, on magazine covers, at the head of boardroom tables. Her lips curved into a slow smile. "Now that's the man I saw." Jacob swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I feel like I just came back to life." Monica stood, walking toward him. "You haven't seen anything yet." They left the spa, the late afternoon light catching on Jacob's diamond ring as he slid into the Bentley. As they drove, the scenery changed, the crowded streets giving way to wider, cleaner roads lined with palm trees and luxury apartments. Finally, they turned onto a private drive. At the end of it stood a mansion so striking Jacob had to blink twice to be sure it was real. Its white exterior gleamed in the sun, glass walls reflecting the lush gardens. A fountain danced in the center of the driveway, the water catching the light in glittering arcs. "This is your house?" Jacob asked, his voice almost a whisper. Monica's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "No. It's our home now." The wrought iron gates rolled open, and a golden retriever bounded toward them, barking joyfully. Jacob stepped out slowly, like a man stepping into a fairy tale. Inside, the air smelled of vanilla and lavender. Sunlight spilled over marble floors and African art, paintings from Ghana, sculptures from Egypt, woven tapestries from South Africa. The place radiated elegance without losing warmth. On the grand staircase, a little girl with curly hair appeared, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mommy, who's that?" she asked. Monica opened her arms. "Sophia, come say hi." The girl ran down, wrapping her arms around her mother. Then she peered up at Jacob with curious eyes. "This is my friend," Monica said, crouching beside her. "His name is Jacob. And guess what? He's going to be spending a lot of time with us now." Sophia studied him for a moment. "Are you a good person?" Jacob smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be." Her eyes softened. "Then you can stay. But no scary stories at night." For the first time in years, Jacob chuckled. That night, Monica showed him to a guest room that felt more like a suite in a five-star hotel. She brought him a plate of hot jollof rice, fried plantain, and chicken. He ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was a treasure. Later, he stepped onto the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. Monica joined him, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Now," she said, "tell me, who are you, Jacob?" He looked down at his hands for a long moment before answering. "My name is Jacob Uche. I was once one of the best data scientists in Lagos. I worked with international companies, built models for banks and governments. I had a wife, 2 kids, parents who lived with us. Life was perfect, until one December." His voice wavered. "They were flying to Dubai for our family vacation. I was supposed to join them the next day, but their plane went down. No survivors. The air between them grew heavy. I lost everything in one day, he whispered. I didn't want money. I didn't want friends. I didn't even want to breathe. So I walked out of my life, and never went back. Monica's eyes glistened. I know that pain, she said. I lost my parents in a crash too. And my husband disappeared when Sophia was just 2. I waited for years, but he never came back. Jacob looked at her in quiet shock. You built all this, after that? She nodded. I had to live. For Sophia. For me. Jacob exhaled slowly. You're a fighter. Her smile was soft, almost sad. So are you. They sat together in the silence, the hum of the city below like a distant lullaby. For the first time in years, Jacob felt something stir inside him, a dangerous, fragile thing he'd thought he'd buried forever. Hope. The next morning, sunlight poured through silk curtains, spilling golden warmth across the polished wood floors. Jacob lay still for a moment, eyes open, listening. He didn't hear the rumble of okadas on the road above his head, or the hiss of boiling gutter water. No distant shouts. No honking horns echoing off the bridge's concrete belly. Instead, birds. The melodic trill of songbirds drifting in from the garden. The faint clinking of dishes somewhere below. And, the smell. Warm bread, coffee, something sweet. He sat up, blinking at the soft, neatly folded sheets around him. His beard was still freshly trimmed, his hair still smooth from yesterday's cut. For a few moments, he almost believed it wasn't real. That he would wake again on the cold concrete, staring up at the rusting beams of the bridge. But when he ran a hand across his jaw and felt smooth skin, when his gaze landed on the neatly pressed clothes folded over a chair, reality anchored itself again. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he said. The door creaked open and Sophia peeked in, her curls bouncing as she smiled. Good morning, Mr. Jacob. Mommy says breakfast is ready. Jacob smiled back. Good morning, Sophia. And you can call me Uncle Jacob if you want. Her smile widened. Okay, Uncle Jacob. She disappeared just as quickly, her footsteps pattering down the hallway. Jacob exhaled slowly. He hadn't been called uncle by a child since his niece, years ago. The sound of it tugged at something deep inside him. He dressed and headed downstairs, the polished staircase gleaming under his feet. The dining room was spacious but not cold, sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, lighting up a long table laid with fresh bread, pap, scrambled eggs, and a spread of tropical fruits. Monica was already seated, dressed in a sleek navy suit, her laptop open beside a bowl of fruit. She looked up and smiled warmly. Morning. Morning, he replied, taking the seat across from her. I hope you're hungry, she said, sliding the bread basket toward him. Jacob glanced at the table, almost overwhelmed. It's been a long time since I've had a meal like this. Then eat up, she said, closing her laptop. You'll need your strength. He raised a brow. For what? Are we going somewhere? Her lips curved into a knowing smile. No. You're starting work today. Jacob froze mid-bite. Work? Yes, she said casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I didn't propose to you out of pity, Jacob. I see a man with a brilliant mind, one that's been wasting under a bridge for too long. I'm giving you a chance to use it again. M-Tech needs you. Jacob set the bread down slowly. Monica. I haven't worked in years. Technology moves fast. I'm rusty. Out of practice. You were one of the best in Lagos, she cut in gently. That kind of talent doesn't vanish. You just need someone to remind you who you are. He looked down at his plate, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know if I'm ready. I do, she said softly, her voice certain. Trust me. something inside him wavered. For years, no one had believed in him, not even himself. Yet here she was, offering him a key back into a world he thought he'd lost forever. By the time they finished breakfast, Jacob still wasn't sure if he was walking into an opportunity or a trap for his heart. But he followed her anyway. The Bentley pulled up to MTech headquarters, a glass and chrome tower that gleamed like it had been polished by the sun itself. Inside, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint hum of high-speed servers and quiet efficiency. Employees in branded shirts moved with purpose, some tapping on tablets, others in hushed conversations. Heads turned the moment Monica stepped in, her presence commanding attention. But their curious gazes shifted quickly to the man walking beside her. "Is that her driver?" someone whispered. "No, maybe security," another guessed. Jacob kept his eyes forward, ignoring the murmurs. They took the elevator to the executive floor, where Monica led him into a spacious, sunlit office. 3 monitors stood on a sleek desk, whiteboards along the wall filled with graphs, algorithms, and market charts. A crisp folder sat in the center of the desk, and on top of it, a welcome card in bold letters. "Welcome, Mr. Uch, Head of Data Intelligence." Jacob stared at it. "This is for me?" Monica nodded. "From today, you'll work directly under me. Your job is to see what others miss, to analyze, to innovate, to save us from making costly mistakes before they happen." He turned slowly, scanning the office. For the first time in years, something clicked into place in his mind. It was like stepping back into a familiar language, one he'd forgotten he knew how to speak. "You're serious about this," he said quietly. "Deadly serious," she replied. The first few days were a test. The software tools were new, the data sets massive. But bit by bit, muscle memory returned. His mind began to fire on all cylinders again, patterns revealed themselves, anomalies jumped out. He spotted inefficiencies in supply chain models that no one else had noticed, recalibrated algorithms to improve predictive accuracy, and proposed new strategies that saved the company millions in optimization costs. One afternoon, Monica walked into his office holding a file. "Do you know what you just did?" she asked. Jacob looked up, brow furrowed. "I was just running numbers." "You just saved us 250 million naira a year," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "The board is impressed." Jacob blinked. "I was just doing my job." "That," she said with a smile, "is what makes you great." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Her words, simple but sincere, lodged themselves deep in his chest. "Thank you," he managed, his voice low. Monica's eyes held his for a beat longer than necessary before she turned to leave. That night, lying in his new bed, Jacob stared at the ceiling and realized something he hadn't in years. He was not just surviving anymore. He was living. By the end of Jacob's 3rd week at MTech, whispers in the office had shifted from "who is he?" to "did you see what he just did?" His name traveled through meeting rooms and over coffee breaks. People who once assumed he was Monica's charity case now lingered by his office, eager to pick his brain. It wasn't just that Jacob was good, he was different. He didn't simply run data models, he dissected them, asked questions no one had thought to ask, spotted links between numbers and human behavior that others missed. One morning, during a weekly analytics review, a junior analyst named Ifeoma hesitated at the end of her presentation. "I think we're losing users in the northern markets because of server downtime," she said, "but I can't find a pattern." Jacob leaned forward, eyes scanning the heat maps and uptime logs on the projector screen. "It's not downtime," he said quietly. "It's peak hour throttling." Heads turned. "See here?" He tapped the table where Ifeoma's graph dipped at irregular intervals. "That's when we roll out automatic updates. But the connection speeds in certain areas can't handle simultaneous downloads without choking the service. They're not leaving because they're unhappy, they're leaving because they think the app's broken." The room went silent. Push updates in staggered windows, Jacob concluded, and usage will climb again. 2 weeks later, metrics confirmed his prediction to the decimal. Mteka's northern market retention rose by 18%. Ifeoma stopped by his office with a shy smile. "Thank you for backing me up in that meeting," she said. "You did the work," Jacob replied. "I just helped you see the shape of it." Word spread faster than any official memo could have. Jacob wasn't just Monica's mysterious hire anymore, he was the man who could solve problems others didn't even know they had. One Thursday evening, long after most employees had left, Jacob was still at his desk, sleeves rolled up, a faint furrow between his brows. Numbers scrolled across his screen in cascading columns. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the soft knock on the door. "Still here?" Monica's voice carried a note of amusement. Jacob looked up, blinking as if surfacing from deep water. "I was just finishing something." She stepped inside, setting a takeaway cup of coffee on his desk. "Finishing something? Or running from the fact that it's past 8 and you haven't eaten?" He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "I lost track of time." "I noticed," she said, studying him. The office's warm lamplight softened her features, casting a golden glow over her cream blouse. "You've been doing incredible work, Jacob," she said quietly. "The board keeps asking how I found you. I tell them the truth, I didn't find you. I just gave you a place to stand." He looked down at the coffee, unsure how to respond. Compliments were still foreign currency to him, precious, almost too much to spend. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said at last. Monica shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just, don't disappear on me." The weight of her words settled between them, unspoken but undeniable. At home, Sophia had warmed up to Jacob in her own way. He'd learned that she liked her eggs scrambled, but not too wet, that she always read before bed, and that she had a knack for asking the kinds of questions most adults avoided. One night, as he passed her room, he heard her voice. "Uncle Jacob?" He paused in the doorway. "Yes?" She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, a half-built Lego set beside her. "Do you like living here?" He hesitated, caught off guard. "Yes. I do." She smiled, satisfied. "Good. Because mommy smiles more when you're here." Jacob stood frozen for a beat after she turned back to her Lego pieces, her words echoing in his mind. A month later, MTech hosted its annual Innovation Summit, drawing investors, journalists, and tech leaders from across the continent. Jacob was slated to give a talk on predictive analytics in emerging markets, a slot Monica had insisted he take, despite his protests that he wasn't ready for the public spotlight. When the day came, Jacob stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. For a heartbeat, he was back under the bridge, anonymous and forgotten. But then he spotted Monica in the front row, her gaze steady, her expression the same one she'd worn that first day, like she knew something about him the world hadn't caught up to yet. The talk flowed. He spoke with the precision of a scientist and the conviction of a man who'd fought for his second chance. By the end, the audience was on their feet. As Jacob stepped off the stage, Monica met him with a quiet smile. "Told you," she said. He smiled back, and for the first time in years, it wasn't tinged with doubt. That night, as rain pattered against the mansion's wide windows, Jacob and Monica found themselves on the balcony, glasses of wine in hand. The city's lights shimmered through the mist, soft and blurred. "Why did you say yes that day?" she asked suddenly. Jacob chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Honestly? I thought you were crazy." She laughed, shaking her head. "But," he added, his tone softening, "there was something in your eyes. I didn't know if it was grace, or courage, or just hope. But I knew I needed it. That's why I made that request, to see if you were serious. I never thought you'd actually kneel." "And now?" she asked. He met her gaze. "Now I know you were an angel in disguise." The words hung in the air, charged and quiet, until the rain softened to a whisper. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew, something between them had shifted. The weeks that followed blurred into a steady rhythm, long days at M-Tech, warm evenings at the mansion, and quiet, almost sacred moments when the world outside seemed to fade entirely. But beneath the calm, something else was taking root. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. Jacob found himself noticing the way Monica's eyes lit up when she explained a new idea, or the way she laughed, freely, without the polished restraint she wore in public, when Sophia told one of her dramatic bedtime stories. And sometimes, when he caught her looking at him, there was a softness there that made him feel both steady and unmoored at once. One Friday evening, after the last of the M-Tech staff had gone home, Monica appeared in his doorway holding 2 mugs of tea. "I'm kidnapping you," she said matter-of-factly. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Kidnapping?" "Yes," she said, setting the mugs down. "We're leaving the office right now, before you find another excuse to work until midnight." He smiled faintly, powering down his monitors. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." The Bentley carried them out of the city, past the glittering high-rises and into the quieter outskirts where the air smelled faintly of rain and earth. Eventually, Monica pulled into a private drive lined with frangipani trees, their pale blossoms glowing under the soft light of lantern posts. At the end stood a glass-walled building that seemed to grow out of the surrounding greenery. Inside, Jacob realized it wasn't a restaurant, or a conference venue, but an art gallery, private, intimate, and already closed for the night. "I know the owner," Monica explained as she led him inside. "Thought you might like some quiet." Jacob wandered slowly between the exhibits. Most were pieces from across Africa, bold, vibrant canvases filled with movement and history. One sculpture in particular caught his eye, a bronze figure of a man half buried in the ground, one arm reaching skyward. He stood there a long time. Monica joined him, her gaze following his. "It's called Resurgence," she said softly. "The artist said it's about someone pulling themselves out of the earth after being buried alive." Jacob's throat tightened. "I know what that feels like." She glanced at him, her voice quiet. "You're doing more than pulling yourself out, Jacob. You're teaching others they can, too." For a moment, neither of them moved. The gallery was silent except for the faint hum of the lights, the scent of frangipani still clinging to their clothes. Later that night, back at the mansion, Monica found Sophia asleep on the couch with a book sprawled across her lap. She covered her daughter with a blanket before turning to Jacob. "Walk with me?" she asked. They stepped out into the garden, where the air was cool and the night sounds wrapped around them, crickets, the rustle of palm leaves, the distant hush of waves against the shore. At the far end of the garden, Monica stopped beneath a jacaranda tree, its pale purple blossoms glowing in the moonlight. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You've changed this house," she said. "I didn't even realize it was quiet until you made it alive again." Jacob hesitated, unsure how to answer. "You've changed me, too. I didn't think I had anything left to give. But you made me remember who I was." The space between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. Jacob's heart thudded in his chest. He'd never been afraid of numbers or logic, but this was different. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer. "If I do this," he murmured, "it's not because I owe you. It's because I want to." Monica's breath caught. "Then do it." Jacob leaned in, and their lips met, soft, tentative, but charged with years of things unsaid. The kiss lingered, then broke gently, leaving both of them standing in the moonlight, caught between past wounds and new beginnings. That weekend, something in their rhythm shifted. Jacob began joining Monica and Sophia for Saturday breakfasts on the terrace, laughing as Sophia quizzed him on riddles she found in her school books. Monica found herself lingering by his office more often, drawn not by business, but by the comfort of his presence. And then, one rainy Tuesday night, Jacob made a decision. If she could kneel for him in front of strangers, if she could risk her pride for his dignity, then he could give her something in return, something real, something unshakable. The question wasn't whether he loved her. The question was whether he was brave enough to say it out loud. The rain had not let up all day. It drummed steadily against the wide glass windows of the mansion, pooling in silver ripples along the garden paths. The evening air was thick with the scent of wet earth and hibiscus, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning. Jacob sat at his desk in the study, but the spreadsheets on his laptop blurred into meaningless lines. His mind wasn't on M-Tech. It was on Monica, on the way she'd walked into his life without hesitation, on the way she had never once looked at him as anything less than her equal, even when the world might have. He remembered the sound of her voice that first day, steady and unwavering as she'd asked him to marry her in the middle of the street. The memory made him smile and ache at the same time. If she could give him that kind of beginning, he could give her the ending she deserved. He opened a small drawer on his desk. Inside was a velvet box. He'd bought the ring 2 weeks ago, quietly, after days of visiting jewelers, asking questions, rejecting designs that felt too cold or impersonal. The one he chose wasn't the most expensive, but it was perfect, platinum, with a deep sapphire in the center, framed by 2 small diamonds. The sapphire reminded him of her eyes when she was deep in thought, the diamonds of the light she carried even in the darkest moments. Tonight was the night. Dinner was quiet, the rain a steady backdrop to the clinking of cutlery. Sophia chattered about a school science fair, describing in detail the volcano model she planned to build. Monica smiled, listening, occasionally meeting Jacob's eyes across the table. After Sophia went upstairs for her bath, Jacob took a breath. "Can I borrow you for a moment?" he asked Monica. She tilted her head, curious. "Of course." He led her upstairs, past the familiar hallways, to the rooftop balcony. The city stretched out before them in a misty glow, each streetlight softened by the rain. The glass railing was slick beneath his hand, but he didn't care. Monica stepped out beside him, hugging her shawl tighter. "It's beautiful up here in the rain," she said softly. Jacob turned to face her, his heart pounding hard enough that he was certain she could hear it. "You remember that day outside the supermarket?" he began. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I'd be worried if you forgot." "I haven't," he said. "Not for a second. You asked me to marry you, and I said yes, but not because I understood what you were offering. At the time, I didn't believe I deserved it. I thought maybe it was kindness, maybe pity. But now I know it was something else entirely." Monica's eyes searched his face. "You gave me back my life," Jacob continued, his voice thick. "You gave me a reason to wake up, to fight, to love again. And I've realized something, when you knelt for me that day, you weren't just asking for a promise. You were giving me one. Tonight, I want to give you mine." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the velvet box, and knelt. For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass. "Monica Williams," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray the depth of it, "will you marry me, again? But this time, on my terms, because I choose you, with all that I am, for all that I have left of this life." Monica's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. She blinked hard, and the tears spilled anyway. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jacob. 1,000 times yes." When he slid the ring onto her finger, it gleamed against the city lights. She pulled him to his feet, kissing him with a fierceness that made the rain and the cold vanish. Sophia, who had peeked from the stairwell after hearing voices on the roof, clapped her hands so loudly they both turned in surprise. "I knew it," she shouted before darting back inside, her giggles echoing down the hall. They stood there a while longer, watching the city, their hands intertwined. It didn't matter that they were already engaged, this was different. This was a renewal, a vow that wasn't born from rescue, but from choice. And in that moment, Jacob realized something that had eluded him for years: he wasn't just living again. He was home. The days after the wedding felt like stepping into a new chapter neither of them had dared to dream about years ago. The photos from the ceremony spread like wildfire, not just across Lagos, but internationally. Headlines called it the love story that defied the odds, from bridge to boardroom, and when a billionaire knelt for a homeless man. But inside the mansion, life settled into something far quieter. Jacob returned to M-Tech with a new energy, not just as head of data intelligence but now as Monica's husband, her partner in every sense. Their dynamic had shifted in ways subtle yet profound. Decisions at the company flowed more seamlessly, their disagreements resolved with a mutual respect that left the board both impressed and slightly awed. Sophia, now entering her teenage years, seemed to grow more confident too. At school, she spoke openly about her two parents, with a pride that was unshakable. One afternoon, she bounded into Jacob's office clutching a flyer. "It's a robotics competition," she said breathlessly. "Can you help me build something for it?" Jacob smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I thought you'd never ask." That evening, the dining room became a makeshift workshop. Wires, microchips, and coding scripts sprawled across the table as father and daughter worked side by side. Monica watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling at the sight. This was the real victory. Months passed, and the rhythm of their lives deepened. Then, one Tuesday morning, Monica sat across from Jacob at breakfast, her eyes sparkling in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. "I have something to tell you," she said. Jacob set down his coffee, curiosity piqued. "You're smiling like you just closed a $1 billion deal." She laughed softly. "Better. We're having a baby." For a second, Jacob didn't move. The word seemed to hover in the air, almost unreal. "A baby," he repeated, his voice low. She nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. 1,000 emotions collided in his chest: joy, fear, gratitude, disbelief. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Monica, this is," his voice caught, and he had to swallow hard. "This is more than I ever thought I'd have again." Her eyes softened. "For me too." The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. The guest room near their bedroom was transformed into a nursery, walls painted a soft sage green, shelves lined with tiny clothes and plush toys. Sophia took her role as big sister seriously, so seriously that she began compiling a training manual for the baby, complete with hand-drawn diagrams of how to tell if someone was upset or needed a hug. Jacob accompanied Monica to every prenatal appointment, holding her hand during ultrasounds, marveling at the grainy images that showed the small, flickering heartbeat of their child. And then, on a clear September morning, their son was born. They named him Williams Chinedu, honoring Monica's late parents and Jacob's father. The moment Jacob held the baby in his arms, he felt something inside him knit itself back together, something that had been broken since the day he lost his first family. Monica, exhausted but radiant, looked up at him. This is the family I always prayed for." Jacob bent and kissed her forehead. "And this is the family I thought I'd never deserve again." In the weeks that followed, the mansion filled with the soft chaos of new life, midnight feedings, lullabies, and the occasional wail that echoed down the hallways. Sophia adapted quickly, proudly introducing her little brother to anyone who visited. And one quiet night, as Jacob stood at the nursery window with Williams asleep against his shoulder, Monica slipped her arms around him from behind. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly. "All the time," he said. Neither of them spoke after that. They didn't have to. Years slipped by in the way they often do when life is full: quiet mornings at the breakfast table, busy afternoons at M-Tech, and evenings filled with homework, bedtime stories, and the soft background hum of a household at peace. Williams grew into a curious, wide-eyed boy, forever asking questions about how things worked. At just 6 years old, he was already dismantling gadgets to see the inside magic and coding simple animations on a tablet Jacob had given him. Monica often joked that he was a perfect blend of Jacob's analytical mind and her relentless drive. Sophia, meanwhile, had transformed into a young woman with the same quiet confidence her mother carried, but with a warmth that was distinctly her own. She excelled at school, not just academically, but as a leader. She volunteered at community clinics, tutored younger students, and seemed to thrive on finding solutions where others saw obstacles. By the time she turned 18, she was already on the cusp of something remarkable. The day of Sophia's university graduation dawned bright and clear. The air buzzed with excitement as families gathered at the University of Nigeria's ceremonial hall, the scent of flowers and the rustle of graduation gowns filling the air. Monica stood in the crowd, her arm linked with Jacob's, both of them scanning the stage until they spotted her. There she was, Sophia, in a white lab coat, stethoscope around her neck, the youngest medical graduate in her class. The crowd roared as her name was called. Monica's eyes shimmered as she whispered, "She did it." Jacob's smile was steady, but his voice carried the weight of pride that words couldn't hold. She didn't just do it. She owned it. After the ceremony, they gathered for photos under a blooming jacaranda tree. That's when a tall, sharply dressed young man approached, holding a small bouquet of lilies. "Hi," he said to Sophia with an easy smile. "I'm Uche. I saw your presentation on GAN mapping for pediatric diagnostics. It was brilliant." Sophia blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Thank you." She accepted the flowers, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. From a short distance away, Monica raised a brow. Jacob caught it and chuckled quietly. "Relax," he murmured. "She's growing up." Weeks later, the name Uche came up more often. What began as shared research discussions turned into video calls, coffee meetups, and eventually weekend visits. Jacob noticed the change in Sophia's laughter, the way she carried herself with a subtle but certain glow. It wasn't long before Uche showed up at the mansion with his parents. They were formal, respectful, and deeply traditional. "My son wishes to court your daughter," Uche's father said plainly after introductions were made. Monica and Jacob exchanged a quick glance, surprised, but not displeased. Jacob leaned forward slightly. "You have our permission. But know this, our daughter is precious to us. She deserves respect, patience, and partnership. Nothing less." Uche nodded solemnly. "I understand, sir." 3 years passed almost faster than either of them expected. Sophia, now 21, had carved her own path in the medical field while maintaining her relationship with Uche. It was clear to everyone that this was no casual pairing, it was a partnership built on shared ambition and mutual respect. On her 21st birthday, Uche proved just how serious he was. The celebration was in full swing, the mansion buzzing with laughter and music. Friends, family, and business partners mingled under the glow of chandeliers. Monica had just stepped onto the balcony to catch her breath when the music shifted, softening into something slower. She turned to see Uche standing at the center of the room, holding a small velvet box. Sophia stood frozen in front of him, her eyes wide. "I met you when you were already extraordinary," Uche began. "But every day since, you've redefined what that means. I want to spend my life beside you, building something just as extraordinary together." He knelt. "Sophia, will you marry me?" The room held its breath until she said, with a trembling smile, "Yes." The applause was deafening. Monica, watching from the doorway, felt tears spill over. Jacob moved to her side, his hand finding hers. "She's ready," he murmured. "She's more than ready," Monica whispered back. The months leading up to Sophia's wedding felt like a blur of color, music, and tradition. The mansion became a hive of activity, tailors arriving with bolts of shimmering lace, chefs sampling menu options, and event planners moving through the halls with clipboards in hand. Monica insisted that the wedding reflect both families' heritage. There would be an Igbo traditional ceremony followed by a Western-style reception. Two worlds, one celebration, she called it, her voice tinged with the same excitement Sophia had carried since the proposal. Jacob found himself deeply involved in the preparations, not because anyone asked him to be, but because he wanted to. He was there for every food tasting, every final fitting, and every meeting with the master of ceremonies. It wasn't just his daughter's wedding, it was a milestone that felt like a gift he'd never dared to dream of a decade ago. The day finally arrived. The venue, the grand ballroom of the Eco Hotel in Lagos, transformed into a space that shimmered like a jewel box. Golden drapes framed the windows, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the tables, and fresh flowers spilled across every surface. The air smelled faintly of roses and the rich spices from the kitchen. Guests arrived in waves, dignitaries, business magnates, celebrities, old friends from school, and family from both sides. Some had flown in from London, Dubai, and New York, eager to witness the union of two of Nigeria's most promising young leaders. Sophia emerged in her bridal gown, an ivory masterpiece that caught every glint of light. The crowd gasped audibly. Monica stood at her side, radiant in a gold-trimmed dress, while Jacob, looking sharp in a custom black suit, offered his arm. "Ready?" he asked Sophia quietly. She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I've been ready my whole life." Together, Monica and Jacob walked her down the aisle. As they reached the front, Sophia turned to them briefly and whispered, "Thank you, for everything." The vows were a blend of tradition and heartfelt promises. Oina spoke of building a future together grounded in love and service. Sophia promised to honor not just him, but the families they came from. The "I do" was met with an eruption of applause and a swell of Igbo highlife music that had guests on their feet. But it was during the reception, when Jacob rose to give his toast, that the room fell into a deeper kind of silence. He stood at the head table, his posture tall, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Years ago," he began, "I lived under a bridge. I had lost my wife, my children, my parents, and myself. I thought life had taken everything it could. I had no reason to wake up each morning. Then one day, an angel walked into my life. She didn't see a broken man. She saw a man who still had something to give." Jacob turned toward Monica, his eyes soft. "Because of her, I learned to live again. I found love again. And I gained a daughter who has been one of the greatest joys of my life." He faced the crowd now, his voice thick but unwavering. "Sophia, today I watch you begin your own journey. My only advice is this: love is not about never falling, it's about finding the person who will help you rise each time you do. I know you found that in Oina. And Oina, I know you will protect, honor, and cherish her. Not because it's easy, but because she's worth every effort." For a moment, the room was still. Then the applause came, not polite, but powerful, many guests rising to their feet. Even the waitstaff paused, some discreetly wiping at their eyes. Later that evening, as the music swelled and the dance floor filled, Monica found Jacob by the edge of the crowd. "You made half the room cry," she teased, though her own eyes were still glistening. He smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to. I just meant every word." She slipped her arm through his. "I know you did." From across the ballroom, Sophia caught their gaze and mouthed "Thank you." And in that moment, Jacob realized, this wasn't just a wedding. It was the full-circle moment he never thought he'd live to see. 9 months after Sophia's wedding, the mansion was alive with a different kind of anticipation. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and talcum powder, a combination that came from the newly prepared nursery upstairs. Sophia, her hair pulled back and her face glowing with the unmistakable aura of new motherhood, sat propped up in bed at the private hospital suite. In her arms was a newborn wrapped in a soft pink blanket, a tiny hand curling and uncurling against her chest. Jacob stood at the foot of the bed, almost afraid to breathe. Monica was at his side, her arm hooked gently through his, eyes fixed on the little bundle. "She's perfect," Monica whispered. Sophia smiled, tired but radiant. "Meet Amarachi," she said softly. "It means God's grace." The name struck Jacob like a soft blow to the heart. He stepped forward, and Sophia carefully placed the baby into his arms. He stared down at her tiny face, her eyes blinking open just long enough to meet his. "You don't know it yet, little one," Jacob murmured, his voice shaking, "but you've been born into a miracle." Monica leaned in, kissing the baby's forehead. "And you'll grow up knowing where you came from, and the power of believing in people." Back at the mansion, Amarachi's arrival seemed to breathe new life into everyone. Williams, now a lively 9-year-old, took to being a cousin like it was a full-time job, bringing her toys, inventing silly songs to make her laugh, and trying to teach her how to code by tapping random keys on an unplugged keyboard. The evenings often ended with the family gathered on the balcony, Sophia rocking Amarachi, Oina beside her, Williams chasing fireflies in the garden, and Monica and Jacob sitting together with the kind of contentment that only comes after years of storms. One of those nights, Monica sat back in her chair, her gaze following Williams as he darted across the lawn. "Jacob," she said slowly, "I've been thinking." He glanced at her. "About?" "About people like you, before I met you. People who have talent, drive, the potential to change the world, but no one sees them. No one gives them a way back." Jacob was silent, letting her continue. "I want to create something for them. A foundation. Not charity, opportunity. Skills training, tech education, business incubation. A place where the forgotten can rise again." She turned to look at him fully. "I want to call it the Uche Foundation." Jacob's brow furrowed, his voice low. "You want to name it after me?" Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "After us. After what your story represents." He blinked, fighting the sudden sting in his eyes. "Monica, you never stop surprising me." Williams, overhearing just enough to get excited, bounded over. "Can I help? I can build the website." Monica laughed. "Yes, baby, you can." Jacob sat there, the noise of the family swirling around him, and felt it settle in his bones. This wasn't just about a name on a building. This was about giving others the second chance he had been given, and ensuring it outlived them both. 3 months later, the Uche Foundation stood gleaming on a stretch of land in Aja that had once been a struggling market. The transformation was breathtaking. Wide glass windows reflected the Lego sky, while the entrance was framed by tall, arching pillars etched with the words "Your story isn't over yet." Inside, the facility was a hive of possibility, computer labs lined with brand new equipment, classrooms with smart boards, a counseling wing painted in soft, calming colors, and dormitories that felt more like boutique hotels than temporary housing. Every detail had been designed to remind its occupants of one thing: dignity. Opening day was more than just a ribbon cutting. It was an event that drew government officials, business leaders, journalists, and, most importantly, the very people the foundation was meant to serve. Dozens of former street hawkers, widows, and young people who had once slept under bridges now stood tall in fresh clothes, holding laptops, notebooks, and resumes. Monica, dressed in an elegant Ankara gown that fused tradition with modern design, took the podium first. Her voice carried warmth but also the sharp conviction of a woman who knew exactly why she was there. "This place is not charity," she said, scanning the crowd. "It's justice. It's a reminder that no human being is too far gone to rise again. I was celebrated in the media, yes, but I was also broken once. So was Jacob. And now, look at what God has done." The applause rolled through the hall like a wave. When it was Jacob's turn, he stepped up to the microphone slowly, his dark suit pressed, his hands steady. For a moment, he simply looked out at the faces, some eager, some cautious, some still wearing the invisible weight he knew all too well. "I lost my wife, my children, my parents, and my will to live," he began quietly. "I didn't just fall, I disappeared. And I thought no one would ever find me again." A hush fell over the room. But then, one day, Monica did. She didn't see a homeless man. She saw a man who still had something to give. And she gave me a reason to wake up again. That's what this place is about, giving people a reason. Not pity, not handouts. A chance. A choice. A future. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "If you walk through these doors, you're telling the world you are not finished yet. And I promise you, we will stand with you until you can stand on your own." The applause was thunderous, and some in the audience stood, clapping through tears. Cameras flashed. For those few minutes, the foundation wasn't just a building, it was a beacon. As evening fell, Jacob and Monica stood together on the rooftop of the new facility, watching the city lights blink to life. Below them, the foundation's courtyard was still buzzing with music, laughter, and small groups deep in conversation about the programs ahead. "I'm proud of you," Jacob said softly. Monica turned her head, her eyes warm. "I'm proud of us." He chuckled quietly. "You know, I still think about that day outside the supermarket. I keep wondering what made you stop." She smiled faintly. "I saw a man who knew pain, but hadn't let it take his mind. You talked like someone whose brilliance was still burning under the dust. I saw a broken king, and I knew God wasn't done with him." Jacob's chest tightened, the weight of her words pressing against memories he rarely touched. "And I thought you were crazy." She laughed, shaking her head. "I still am. But it worked." Within 2 years, the Uche Foundation had grown beyond anything Monica and Jacob had imagined. Its programs expanded into rural communities, teaching not only technology but also financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and creative arts. Graduates were finding jobs in tech firms, launching small businesses, and even returning to the foundation as mentors. The story of the foundation, and of Monica and Jacob themselves, spread far beyond Nigeria. International media picked it up, and their journey was featured in documentaries, business magazines, and inspirational podcasts. Invitations poured in from global conferences. One of the biggest came from the World Leadership Summit in Geneva, where they were asked to give the keynote address on transforming lives through second chances. The flight to Switzerland was Jacob's first time leaving the African continent since before his family's tragedy. Sitting beside Monica in the business class cabin, he stared out at the clouds, remembering a time when he'd avoided even looking up at planes. "I never thought I'd be up here again," he murmured. Monica reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We're not just passengers anymore, Jacob. We're on a mission." The conference hall in Geneva was a sea of tailored suits and translation headsets, but the moment Monica began speaking, the formality seemed to melt. She told their story plainly, not the sanitized version, but the raw truth of how a dusty roadside proposal had become a global movement. When Jacob took the stage, he didn't speak from notes. "I am standing here today," he began, "because someone saw me not for what I was, but for what I could be. Every one of you has the power to do the same for someone else. You may think your act of kindness is small, but for the person receiving it, it can be the beginning of an entirely new life." When they finished, the standing ovation was long and loud. Leaders approached them afterward, offering partnerships and funding for new branches of the foundation. It was a triumph. But just as they began to plan the expansion, life delivered a reminder that even the strongest journeys are never without storms. Back in Lagos, during a routine health check, Jacob's doctor frowned slightly at the results. "It's probably nothing," he said carefully, "but I'd like to run some more tests." The days waiting for the results were long and heavy. Monica tried to keep her composure, but at night, she would lie awake listening to Jacob's breathing, fear curling in her chest. When the call finally came, Jacob listened quietly, nodding. "I understand, doctor. Thank you." After he hung up, Monica searched his face. "What is it?" He took her hand. "It's not life-threatening. But it's a heart condition. They want me to slow down." Her relief was tempered by concern. "Then we will slow down," she said firmly. "You've been carrying the world for years. It's time to let others take some of the weight." Jacob smiled faintly. "I'm not afraid, Monica. Because whatever happens, I've already lived a miracle." The weeks after Jacob's diagnosis moved at a different pace. For years, he had been the engine that never stopped: early mornings, late nights, endless travel, and a mind that rarely took a breath. Now, under doctor's orders, his schedule was trimmed to the essentials. At first, it was frustrating. Sitting out of certain meetings at MTech. Letting younger directors take the lead on some of the foundation's projects. Watching others make decisions he would have once overseen himself. But slowly, he began to see what Monica had been trying to tell him for years: slowing down didn't mean stepping away, it meant making room for others to rise. One Saturday morning, Jacob woke to the sound of laughter downstairs. When he walked into the living room, he found Williams on the floor with Amarachi, showing her how to assemble a drone. Sophia was sitting on the couch, sketching designs for a new pediatric clinic she and Oina were planning. Monica was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of egusi soup, her voice floating through the open space as she hummed an old tune. Jacob stood there quietly for a long moment, taking it all in. Monica looked up and caught his gaze. "You're staring," she said with a smile. "I'm memorizing," he replied. That evening, after dinner, he gathered the whole family in the garden. The jacaranda tree was in full bloom, purple petals scattered across the grass. Lanterns hung from its branches, casting warm circles of light over their faces. "I wanted to talk to you all," Jacob began, his voice calm but purposeful. "I've been thinking about what we've built, our family, our home, the foundation. And I've realized something. One day, I won't be here to see where it all goes. But I want to know that each of you is carrying it forward." William straightened in his seat. "You mean, take over the foundation?" "Yes," Jacob said, looking at him, then at Sophia and Amarachi. "Not just the foundation. Our values. The belief that no one is beyond redemption, that second chances are worth fighting for." Sophia's eyes softened. "You're not going anywhere anytime soon, Dad." Jacob chuckled. "I plan to stick around for a while. But I want you to promise me something. That no matter where life takes you, you'll keep opening doors for people the world has shut out." William spoke first. "I promise." Sophia nodded. "Me too. And so will Amarachi, when she's old enough to choose." Monica reached for Jacob's hand, her voice steady. "You've already given them the blueprint, Jacob. They'll honor it." Later that night, as they sat alone on the balcony, Monica leaned against him. "You know," she said, "that wasn't just a speech. That was a passing of the torch." He smiled faintly. "It was a reminder that what we started doesn't end with us." The city lights stretched out before them, and somewhere below, the sound of distant music drifted up from the streets. For Jacob, it was enough. The years that followed were quieter but no less full. The Uche Foundation grew into a network of centers across West Africa, each one carrying the same inscription over its entrance: "Your story isn't over yet." Williams matured into a gifted young man, blending his coding skills with a deep compassion for people, often traveling to rural branches to mentor students. Sophia and Oina expanded their pediatric clinics across the country, and Amarachi, now a teenager, had inherited her mother's poise and her grandfather's way with words. Jacob and Monica became the living symbols of what the foundation stood for: not because they had the perfect life, but because they had turned broken beginnings into something unshakable. Conferences, interviews, and documentaries often sought them out, yet they found themselves more interested in the day-to-day moments, reading in the garden, walking hand in hand through the foundation's halls, laughing with the grandchildren over dinner. One late afternoon, the family gathered at the original Uche campus of the foundation for its 25th anniversary. The courtyard was filled with graduates, mentors, and staff from across the years. Many wore professional suits, others vibrant traditional attire, but all carried the same expression: gratitude. As Monica stepped to the podium, her hair now streaked with silver, she began with her usual confident tone. "When we opened this place, it was just a building. But what made it matter were the people who came through the doors, and the people who believed in them before the world did." She paused, glancing at Jacob, seated in the front row. "And for me, that belief began with one man. He is the reason this all exists." The applause was long and loud. Jacob rose slowly, walking to the podium. His steps were measured now, but his voice was still warm and steady. "Many years ago," he began, "I was sitting outside a supermarket, not expecting much from life. Then a woman I'd never met knelt in front of me and asked me to marry her." He smiled faintly, and the crowd chuckled. "I told her if she meant it, she'd have to go buy a ring and come back. And she did. That day, I thought she was crazy. Now I know she was right." He glanced toward Monica, his voice softening. "Everything you see here, every story of redemption, every second chance, started because she believed in someone who didn't believe in himself. If there's one thing you take away from today, let it be this: love begins where pride ends." The courtyard fell into a hush before the applause swelled, echoing off the walls. That evening, after the crowd had gone, the family lingered in the courtyard. Amarachi walked over to her grandparents, holding up a sketch she'd made. It was of a woman kneeling before a man in tattered clothes, the words "love begins where pride ends" written above in her careful handwriting. Jacob chuckled softly, tears glinting in his eyes. "She gets it." Monica kissed the girl's forehead. "She comes from it." As the sun set in a blaze of gold and purple over Lagos, Monica and Jacob sat side by side, hands intertwined. The noise of the city faded, replaced by the rustle of palm leaves in the warm breeze. Jacob glanced at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I had to do it all over again, the pain, the loss, the waiting, just to end up here with you, I would." Monica smiled, her eyes bright. "So would I." And there, in the fading light, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing, they knew, their story had never been about the proposal, the company, or even the foundation. It had always been about finding each other. In the end, Monica and Jacob's story wasn't just about love, it was about vision, courage, and the power to see worth in someone the world had forgotten. From a chance encounter outside a supermarket to building a family, a company, and a foundation that transformed lives across continents, they proved one unshakable truth: love begins where pride ends. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, real-life stories that inspire change.